Welcome to Hoshiwar podcast. As I have mentioned in the previous interviews, in this video series, I'm trying to talk to the writers of the books I have already summarized or discussed with you during this podcast. For today, I am very honored to have a special guest with me, a world-renowned economist, Professor Robert Frank. Robert Frank is the Henrietta Johnson Louis Professor Emeritus of Management and Professor Emeritus of Economics at Cornell University's Johnson School of Management, and a distinguished senior fellow at Demos. For more than a decade, his Economic View column appeared monthly in the New York Times. He received his bachelor's degree in mathematics from Georgia Tech, and then taught math and science for 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer in rural Nepal. He holds a MA in statistics and a PhD in economics, both from the University of California at Berkeley. His papers have appeared in the American Economic Review, Econometrica, Journal of Political Economy, and other leading professional journals. Professor Frank's books have been translated into 23 or more languages, including Choosing the Right Pound, Passions with Reason, Microeconomics and Behavior, Principle of Economics with Ben Bernanke, Luxury Fever, What Price the Moral High Ground, Falling Behind, The Economic Naturalist, and the last three won the Darwin Economy, Success and Luck, Good Fortune and the Myths of Meritocracy, and Under the Influence. The Winner-Take-All Society, co-authored with Philip Cook, received the Critics' Choice Award, was named a Notable Book of the Year by the New York Times, and was included in Business Week's list of 10 best books of 1995. Success and Luck also has been among the other books that very well received after the publication. Please let me read a few comments as published on the back of the book, because it may help the audience to recognize the importance of the books. The Bloomberg News writes an earnest argument that all of us, even the rich, would be better off recognizing how luck can lead to success. Tyler Cowen from Original Revolution writes a deep and stimulating book. Financial Times writes Frank is not just arguing that luck plays an important role in the lives of successful people, such as Al Pacino. If that were all he was doing, his book would be engaging, but trivial. But it's much more than interesting than that. Bear with me, because these are important. I would like the audiences to know how important this book is. Frank deftly weaves personal anecdotes with fascinating case studies. Fortune, Frank says, favors the fortunate, and not acknowledging that can have unlucky consequences for both policymakers and businesses. Fortune magazine wrote this. And the Choice magazine says, well-reasoned, coherent, and compelling. Frank is one of the great writers of economics. I highly recommend you can purchase or read this book among the other two books, but my main focus will be this book today, but we will discuss about the other two books. What a fascinating biography, Professor Frank. Also, Professor Frank has several economic theories among others. So the main theories, the most famous one is positional arm race that we will discuss. We touch both of them, and winner take all. So we will cover both of them, and we hear from his own words. Professor Frank is a co-recipient of the 2004 Leontief Prize for Advancing the Frontiers of Economic Thought. He was awarded the Johnson School's Stephen Russell's Distinguished Teaching Award in 2004, 10, and 12, and his Apple Distinguished Teaching Award in 2005. It's fascinating biography. I had to read this, and but also before I move to the first question, I need to mention that along with this video, I will publish a new episode of the podcast Hoshiwar, summarizing and explaining in Farsi the main concepts of Professor Frank's theories and ideas he illustrated in this book, Success and Luck, even though it's Persian language, but I will post a link to that episode in the description of this video, and also links to the Amazon website for the 3 books that we mainly touch base today. Darwin Economy, Success and Luck, and Under the Influence. If you are interested to purchase, I highly recommend all 3 of them among the other books. Before I start my first question, Professor Frank, do you have any comment before I start?
No, thanks for your generous introduction. Let's get on with our conversation.
Sure. Thank you, Professor Frank. I would like to start with your 2011 book, Robert, The Darwin Economy, and then gradually we can move to Success and Luck, and then briefly touching your most recent book, Under the Influence. In the Darwin Economy, you have introduced, I think you introduced your main economic doctrine and fundamentally challenged the theory of competition and brought a new theory, not only based on the pure economics, but also on a Darwinian view of natural selection as we study in biology. My question is, how could you apply evolutionary theory to economics at the first place? How did you come to this theory, learning from evolution, Darwin, and you brought this to economic? And the second part is, in your opinion, who is the better economist? Is Adam Smith, developer of invisible hand theory, or Charles Darwin, developer of natural selection? Which one do you think will be the intellectual founder of economics in the long term? I read this several ways, and you discussed this in several books. I think it could be a good question to start.
Yeah, sure. That's an excellent question. My interest in evolution really goes back well before I became an academic. I was adopted as a baby. I don't ever remember when I learned that. I must have been told at a very young age, but before I had any recollection of having a conversation about it. And the thing about being adopted that always made a big impression on me was that although my adoptive parents were incredibly generous in raising me, and I always felt very, very valued and loved as a child growing up, I was also keenly aware that I was extremely different from them. I didn't look like them. I didn't react to events in a similar way to the way they did. I didn't like the same foods they liked, and so I got the idea early on that much of who we are depends not just on our upbringing, which is also important, but also just on traits that we're born with. I later met my birth mother and her family, and so I saw much more of myself in them than I. So I then had a very good course in biology in high school, and went on to study biology a little bit, and have always read widely in the popular literature of biology. And so the idea that traits evolve, that the things we care about for a reason. The things we care about aren't always good to care about in the modern environment. We like sugars, we like fats. Those tastes were quite adaptive in the original environment of adaptation because food was always so scarce, and if you had a chance to get fat, you should seize it. Today, eating a lot of fats and sugars is bad for your health. So not all traits are adaptive that we inherited, but many of them are. The things that we like to do are generally, according to the Darwinian view of things that help us survive and leave greater numbers of offspring. So in general, they're the kinds of things we like are the kinds of things that increase our resource holdings. And it's always been clear that the question of who survives depends not so much on your absolute resource holdings, but on your relative resource holdings. So even in a famine, there's always some food. Who gets the food? Well, it's not the low-ranking members. In early human societies, mating systems were polygynous. Men took more than one mate if they could. The if they could qualifier is important because that means if some took more than one, others had none. And that's, of course, the ultimate loser's position in the Darwinian scheme of things. And so rank always mattered. And the standard economic theories that continue to be taught in universities leave that part of our concerns completely out. We care if you want to know, is your house okay? The question is, what are its absolute characteristics? How big is it? How many rooms does it have? What kind of features does it have? There's no mention at all made about the context in which your house sits. But that's, if anything, even more important. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, as you mentioned. Right out of college, I went to Nepal. I was a teacher. I taught math and science in a village high school. I lived during those 2 years in a 2-room house. The house had no electricity, no running water. Never for one day during those 2 years did that house seem in any way unsatisfactory. It was a completely marvelous house in that context. It was a nicer house indeed than the houses of the other professors in the high school where I taught. But if I lived in that same house here in Ithaca, New York, it would be unsatisfactory. My children would have been ashamed for their friends to see where we lived. Not because there's anything wrong with their character, it's just living in a house like that here would be a strong signal that you had failed in every way to live up to the expectations that society has for you. So once we acknowledge that rank matters, then the idea that individual decisions always lead to the outcomes that are best for society as a whole, that idea completely fails. The book I'm finishing now has the working title, Smart for One, Dumb for All, and it's about behaviors that are advantageous to us individually, but when we all do them, we get an outcome that nobody likes. So a simple example is everybody stands up to see better. Nobody sees any better than if everybody had remained comfortably seated. And that's the theme I explore at some length in The Darwin Economy and several other earlier books.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks for sending the PDF of the book that you are writing. I haven't finished it, but it was very interesting because I see the points that you covered during the last decade or so in your books. You brought that. I read about the adoption that you also mentioned in that PDF. But anyway, I will finish reading that PDF. For the second question, we can move on to other theories or other concepts that you brought initially in this book, and later you expanded in Success and Luck, and even Under the Influence, the positional goods, the positional arm race, and then the theory of winner take all. We'll come back to the winner take all when we talk in the Success and Luck. We talked about that, but for now, could you please explain what you mean by positional goods and positional arm race? You may cover a little bit about how we compare ourselves to others and how, if everybody stands, nobody can see the stage. But for our audience, could you please elaborate more what you mean by positional goods and the arm race that maybe not only US, globally also happens in Western countries?
Yeah. Well, again, it all is linked to the key idea that every human evaluation is shaped by context. So if, let's say you're taking your 6-year-old daughter to visit her grandparents, and she asks you, are we almost there yet? Well, if 10 miles remain on a 300-mile journey, you'll say, yes, we're almost there. Relax, we're going to arrive almost immediately. If 10 miles remain on an 11-mile journey, you'll say, no, we're just getting started. Relax, take it easy back there. We'll be there eventually. Is it cold out? I grew up in Miami. If somebody asked, is it cold out? What do you like, centigrade or Celsius? If we use centigrade or Fahrenheit. Here we use Fahrenheit. So is it cold out? It's 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 16 degrees Celsius. In Miami, if it was 16 degrees Celsius on a November evening, and we had to go to a football game that evening, we would wear the heaviest coat we owned. It was obviously really cold. We didn't like it. If you would ask somebody in Montreal on a 60-degree Fahrenheit day in March, is it cold out? They would think you were stupid for even asking. Of course, it's not cold out. So unless someone has evidence that context doesn't shape evaluations in those obvious ways, then the same thing applies to the goods we buy. Is my car okay? Is my suit okay? Is my watch okay? All those things are context dependent too. And what that means is that we have the explanation for why there's a very large literature that studies the determinants of human flourishing, what makes people happier, healthier, live longer, function more successfully in their lives. It's long been demonstrated from evidence in that literature that beyond a point that we've long since passed in most countries in the West, increases beyond those points in most forms of private consumption don't have any impact at all on people's health, happiness, longevity, or any other measure of human flourishing. When all the mansions get 10% bigger, people are probably less happy than they were because it's more trouble to manage the bigger properties. When people spend 3 times as much on their daughter's wedding reception, which is what we do in the US now compared to 1980 in inflation-adjusted dollars, nobody's any happier at those receptions. All they've succeeded in doing is raising the bar that defines what people feel is necessary to spend in order to demonstrate that you recognize that it's an important occasion. So these result in positional arms races, as I call them, spending arms races. They're exactly analogous to military arms races. It's completely uncontroversial in the familiar military arms race narrative to say that rival nations spend more and more on bombs because it's very dangerous to have fewer bombs than an adversary. You risk your political survival, your independence if you are less well armed than your rivals. So everybody builds more bombs. But when everybody has 200 nuclear bombs, India and Pakistan each have 200 nuclear bombs, they're no more secure than when they each had 2 industrial nuclear bombs. It's a positional arms race exactly like a military arms race. Why do we spend more on bombs? Well, there are other things we could spend money on. We could spend more on schools, we could spend more on hospitals, we could spend more on medical research. Those goods are ones we care about too, but they matter less in the competition between nations. If they have better TV sets than we do, we don't like that, but we can live with that. If they have more bombs than we do, that's maybe a fatal problem, one we can't live with. So those other things, those things that don't depend nearly as much on relative spending, those are non-positional goods. So just as in the military arms race, we spend more and more on bombs and less on schools and hospitals and other things, other public goods. The same in the private sphere. We spend more and more on housing, on celebrations of special occasions, on funerals, on clothing, on other things, cars, and less on the things that really matter. We spend less and less on retirement savings. We spend less and less on healthcare, less and less on protection against illness and accident and flooding and climate change, other things that would really matter much more for the question of whether we survive and prosper. So that's the positional arms race. In the US, it results in an enormous amount of waste. One simple illustration is compare the years 2012 and 2019 in the US. They're 7 years apart. The best evidence we have is that Americans were equally happy in those 2 years. There's a very big literature on this, and Americans did not get any happier between those 2 years, although we had GDP $3 trillion higher in 2019. That's the last year before the pandemic. Where did the money go? It went mostly to people at the top of the income ladder. These people already had big houses. They were already spending a lot on their daughters' wedding receptions. They already had many cars and many big cars. They spent more on those things. That didn't make them happier at all. So if we had $3 trillion, are there useful things we could spend it on? You don't have to be an imaginative person to think of a long list of things that would matter.
Great explanation. So we will come back to this positional good when we talk about the winner takes all, because I think they are connected to each other. So how the positional goods or the winner takes everything because it's a carrier that takes everything out of the market. I think you greatly discuss in your book. But before I go there, so you talk about the taxing system as well. I'm not, as I said, economist or tax expert, but I think I will cover part of that. But you argued, if we agree, that's necessary to use government to arrive at a better outcome, because you mentioned that more taxing on the high income people and also taxing on the consumption. It then makes sense to use the most efficient and desirable levels. This would involve taxing, for example, you mentioned harmful behaviors like CO2 emissions, congestion, smoking, and extreme consumption. So according to this view, what and how economics and social policies will maximize total welfare of for more people? And in other words, how these policies can address the disparity between individual, and because you talk about the Darwinism side of it, individual interest versus the group interest, you highlighted. What do you think that often the current free market and its inherent vision of competition is sometimes unable to achieve these things that you covered in your book, or what is the gap here? So I would like to hear what's your opinion.
Well, the traditional free market view is that when individuals spend their money in the marketplace, the distribution of goods and services we get is the best possible distribution. It's the most efficient distribution. I'm a big fan of Adam Smith's view that the marketplace greatly increases the amount of productivity that the economy exhibits. We become much more efficient. We divide tasks up, we specialize, we get vastly more efficient in production. My claim is that the way we spend the fruit of that productivity is wasteful, wasteful in the ways I've already described. When I want to spend my money to advance my own interests, then I'll buy a bigger house because a bigger house feels good. But then others buy a bigger house too, and then a bigger house simply becomes the new norm. It doesn't feel good anymore, and so then we buy a still bigger house. Now people live in houses with 30,000 square feet. They have to hire cooks, they have to hire butlers, they have to hire cleaners, they have maids, people who will write books about them. It's a lot of trouble. It was probably a happier time when they lived in houses only 1/3 as big. If you couldn't do anything about that, then this would be not a very interesting thing to think about. Some people think the government should make an agency that should prescribe what people should buy and distribute it. That's been tried before in some economies. It always leads to serious failure. Bureaucratic solutions are typically grossly inefficient, even more so than when we waste money through our own individual spending decisions. What we need to do is just change people's incentives about how they spend their money. And I have a very simple policy proposal that, if adopted, would eliminate most of the $3 trillion of waste I mentioned earlier. We scrap the income tax, get rid of it. In its place, we adopt what I call a much more steeply progressive tax on consumption expenditure. And here's how it would work. You would report your income to the tax authorities just as you do now. We could simplify that greatly, and we should, but report your income as you do now. Then you document how much you added to your savings this year. Many people do that already for tax-exempt retirement accounts. So now we have your income and your savings. The difference between those two numbers, your income minus your savings for this year, that's how much you spent this year. That's your consumption. Subtract off a large standard deduction, maybe $10,000 per person. That's your taxable consumption. We tax that number. If that's a small number, the tax rate is 0. If you want to give people a tax credit, it could even be a negative tax rate on really small amounts of consumption. We have a child tax credit now. That would be an example of that. Then, as consumption gets bigger and bigger, the tax rate on the next dollar you spend gets higher and higher. And unlike the income tax, where we don't want to have high tax rates at the top because we're fearful that would discourage saving and investment, a higher tax rate on consumption at the highest levels would actually encourage greater savings and investment. So if we adapted that simple measure, mansions would grow more slowly, cars would get heavier much less quickly. We would have much more revenue to invest in green energy production. We would have much more revenue to invest in public schooling. We would have more money to invest in medical research, vaccine development, and so on. And everybody would be just as happy as before from what would be a smaller level of private consumption than we would have had under the old regime. And what's more, because there would be more investment under a progressive consumption tax, eventually, even though consumption would be a smaller fraction of GDP, in absolute terms, it would be larger than it would have been under the old tax system. Now, why don't we do this? If that's such a great idea, why don't rich people vote for politicians who will do this?
That was my next question. So how they are being received by the policymakers or politicians?
I wish I had studied that question much earlier in my career. I've started thinking about it, and I believe I have a compelling answer to it. Rich people don't want to see higher taxes on their consumption because they think that would make them less happy. So how does a rich person think about my proposal? Well, he's going to raise my taxes. How do I feel about that? The normal way you think about any proposal is to say, well, the last time they did that, how did that make me feel? So I try to think about the last time they raised my taxes. How did I feel? that way of thinking about the problem doesn't work in the current environment because the tax rates on the top earners have been going down steadily ever since World War II, not just in the US, but all around the world. In World War II, the top tax rate was 92% on the top earners. By the time I graduated from college in 1966, it had fallen to 70. In Reagan's era, it fell to 50% and then lower. It's currently 37%. So thinking about how you would feel if your taxes went up doesn't work because your taxes haven't gone up, they've gone down. So how do you think about the question, if that doesn't work? Well, plan B would be, well, I know taxes will leave me with less income to spend. That's true. How did I feel the last time I had less income? Well, unless you're very lucky, you've experienced times in your life when you did have less income. Maybe you had a bad business year. Maybe you had a health crisis. Maybe you went through a divorce. Maybe your son got arrested and you had to hire an expensive lawyer. Maybe you had a home fire. All sorts of things happened to you that made your income go down, and you vividly remember how you felt each of those times. You felt terrible. Those were unhappy occasions for you. But here's what you don't recognize. Those times were different, each and every one of them, from what happens when your tax rate goes up. When your business has a bad year, when you have a health crisis, when you have a home fire, you have less income, but everybody else in your peer group has the same amount of income as before. When your tax rates go up, you and they all have less money to spend than before. And what are you worried about? You're not worried about being able to buy what you need. Of course, you have way more than you need already. You're worried about being able to buy life's special extras. What do you want? If you live in New York, you want a penthouse apartment with a sweeping view of Central Park. Well, there aren't very many of those. How do you get them? You have to outbid other people who want them. And if your taxes go up and their taxes go up too, those same apartments end up in the same hands as before. So it's a complete cognitive illusion. I call it the mother of all cognitive illusions, that rich people think if they had to pay higher taxes on the top consumption dollars they spend, they'd be less happy. That's not true. They'd be more happy. They would drive their Porsches on much better roads than they currently drive them on, and they would have better emergency medical services. They would have faster trains to ride on. All those things would be much, much better in their lives, and nothing else that matters would be any worse.
That's great. You covered the Porsche versus the Ferrari in your book. I highly recommend you read the book. I think it's a great example. I also explained to my friends and family that, okay, you want to ride in a good road with Porsche, or we ride with the Ferrari on a bad road. So this kind of comparison is very eye-opening. It was for me, at least. Thank you. We come back to the topic of happiness a little bit later when we talk about the luck and success, because and the winner-take-all society, we'll cover part of that later. But for the sake of time, I switch gear a little bit, go to the next book, Success and Luck. They are intertwined. Some of the topics are already related to what previously we discussed, but because there are lots of questions and also critics about if we highlight the role of luck, how the public can perceive that and what might be the negative. We'll cover that. But for the first question, I think there are some confusion or misconception, at least in public, when I talk to them, explaining your book or your idea about the meaning of the word luck. So I think I saw you discuss with some people, interview, that maybe you said, maybe it was better, you explained this better in your book, what you mean by luck. But could you please explain to us for now, at the first place, what is the definition of luck as you discussed in your book, and what it has a relationship with chance? We know that chance and randomness, they have different meanings in science, yes? Well, So how do you explain connection of randomness, chance, and luck, and how they relate, what you mean by luck in your book? And then I go to the other questions.
Yeah, I don't have anything at all complicated in mind when I talk about luck. When I talk about lucky events along a career path, what I mean only is things over which you have no direct control. And a lot of people mistook me to be saying in that book that success is purely a matter of luck. No, the people who succeed in today's marketplace are almost always both hardworking and talented. Today's marketplace is, in fact, more competitive than any marketplace before today. The demands on, well, we see it in the Olympic Games. The times for the winning contestants get lower every year, not just because sometimes people take drugs to help them, even when that's strictly controlled. People have figured out more effective ways to train, and they work harder and longer than they did in the past. That's true in the marketplace in general. In order to make a big success in a competitive marketplace, it's more difficult now than it's ever been. And the people who succeed are almost all of them very hardworking and quite talented. But they're also lucky. And this is the main point I wanted to stress. And here we get into Winner Take All, which was an earlier book that my friend Phil Cook and I published in 1995, trying to explain why income inequality has gotten so much greater now than in the past. And the main reason, we argue, is that technology has extended the reach of the most able performers in every domain. If you were a good storyteller, once you told stories in a small village, that was your role. But now we've got Pixar. Pixar can tell stories to the whole world. So unless you're one of the world's very best, most effective storytellers, people don't have time to listen to you anymore. And the effect of that has been, in many ways, good. We hear better stories now because we are the best storytellers in the world. If we have a child who's ill, we used to seek the advice of the best doctor in our small town. Well, he didn't know very much, that guy, but that was what we did. Now, if there's a rare illness, we get on a Zoom call with the world's expert on that disease who happens to be in London, and he gives advice about what to do. That's better. But in the process, the people who are best at what they do now command ultra premium salaries. If you're just a little bit better than everybody else, the premium you get for being able to provide your services to almost the entire world market is enormous. And the people who are third best, fourth best, 10th, they end up teaching music in the third grade. Nobody wants to hear them perform in Carnegie Hall. So the inequality is largely a result of that, but you can see that if we were saying who's going to win in these winner-take-all markets, it depends mostly on skill and effort, yes, but we've done extensive mathematical simulations where skill and effort count for 90%, 98% of performance. Luck counts for 2%. And if you have enough contestants, then the winner in that contest will almost never be the one who worked the hardest and who is the most talented. It will almost always be one who is among the luckiest of the contestants. Why? Because there are so many contestants that are up near the ceiling on how hard people can work, up near the ceiling on how skillful a person can be. They're crowded together, all competing for the top spot. The very most hardworking and talented, that person on average might have good luck, might have bad luck, but on average will have average luck. He's going to lose to somebody who was lucky, who was almost as talented and hardworking. So that's why luck matters, and it matters that we recognize that, because once you acknowledge that luck was a part of your success, your whole attitude changes about what your obligations are to society as a whole. The people who succeed often today think, I did it all myself, I'm not giving anything back so the people in the next round can have a chance to succeed. The people who recognize how lucky they were and are grateful for it, they want to give back. And we get a different mix of policies when people think about the problem that way.
Yes, you maybe answered some of other questions that I had. The consequence of believing in the role of luck in our life mostly is good. Regarding the testing, I'm going to also summarize this paper. Maybe you are aware of talent versus luck, the role of randomness in success and failure, by two physicists, Pellicino and Biondo, and with the economist Rapisarda in Italy. I'm going to summarize. They also beautifully show that how break, like success, like luck break, cause even the average talented people get more successful compared to the most talented one. Just confirming what you already explained in your book. You may answer that, but I have, you started your book with the experience you had for the cardiac arrest in the tennis play when you were playing tennis with your colleague, Tom Glowich. And then the consequence of that, and it brought you to the concept of how luck can change the life of people. And also you brought several good examples in your book about Mona Lisa. I heard this in one of your interviews, how Mona Lisa got like a famous, or Bryan Cranston, like for the people who don't know, he's famous for playing the Breaking Bad, Walter White, or again, the Kim Kardashian, among others. How do you see it? Maybe you explain part of it, but still I want you to tell the audience, how do you see the role of luck in the life of these famous people? And could you please provide some example to make it easier for the audience to relate again, because you explained, but I would like to maybe emphasize on that, the hard work, perseverance, and skill and talent, how they connect to success. On other side, for example, education, socioeconomic status compared to luck. Because you greatly explained that you are not talking only luck is responsible for the success. The combination beside luck. But even these, some famous people like CEO, we will cover that, they ignore this, and how you can relate and elaborate this for public that, okay, everything is important, but also you need to acknowledge the role of luck, that how Mona Lisa got famous, or how, maybe you can explain these examples as well.
Yeah, one of the main themes in the book is that chance events usually are inconspicuous, and when we think about their effect on a career involves thousands of steps, little steps, and a small chance event at any one stage of a career may shift the path of that career only very slightly, but then the path, once shifted, evolves along a very different trajectory over the next 1,000 steps. Very small changes early on magnify and accumulate over multiple steps and become huge changes. And when you get to a high point in a career, somebody who has succeeded, naturally she will ask herself, why did I succeed? And of course, it's very easy to think of all the time she came in early, all the time she worked late, all the really talented adversaries she had to compete against and do better than in order to get promoted. Those are the classical ingredients of success stories. And when we try to explain our own success to ourselves, of course, we think of those quickly. We're much less likely to think about the teacher who helped keep us out of trouble when we were in the 10th grade, or the fact that the first promotion we got on the job was one that would have gone to a colleague who had to refuse it because he had to stay to care for an ailing parent. Every career would have been vastly different, except for those two small things that happened early on. But those aren't the things we remember when we try to explain our success. We remember, of course, the obvious explanations, which had to do with how hard we worked and how talented we were. The people who do remember typically remember because the episode of luck was more spectacular. That was the case for me in the first of the episodes you mentioned. I've started writing about luck only because I was hit over the head by luck so hard that I couldn't ignore it. And in the specific example you mentioned was when I suffered an episode of sudden cardiac death, they call it, on the tennis court. My partner said that I just fell off the bench. We were sitting between games. He investigated. I wasn't breathing. I had no pulse. He tried to do CPR. He'd never been taught how to do it. He'd seen it on television and in the movies like we all have. And he said he tried for about 5 or 6 minutes, couldn't get it. Finally, I coughed weakly, but then I died again. He had yelled for somebody to call the ambulance service, and he was about to give up when the ambulance attendants came into the tennis facility, and they put the paddles on me. They shocked me back to life, and eventually, a week later, I was out of the hospital and okay, But the question was, why was the ambulance able to get there so quickly? We were far out of town. It would normally take half an hour. The reason was that there had been 2 automobile accidents right near the tennis facility where we were playing. One of them didn't involve any serious injuries. And so the ambulance that had been dispatched to that accident had been able to heal off and come and attend to me. And except for that, I would be dead. And I recognized that. My mother thought, oh, it was destined to happen. No, I thought that was just pure dumb luck that happened. And I've had other incredibly lucky experiences that reinforce that sense. And except for that, I don't think I ever would have had any motivation to write about luck. But once people see the role of luck, then they start to recognize it more and more. And you know, the Mona Lisa example is instructive. Why is she the most famous painting in the world? The sociologist Duncan Watts shared my view that she didn't seem that special when he saw her. It's a very small painting. I was very surprised how small it was. It's very hard to get a close look because there's so many people in the gallery crowding to get a look. In the adjacent gallery, there's another painting by the exact same world-famous artist. Nobody wants to see that painting. Why is the Mona Lisa in such demand? Because she was stolen in 1911. A custodian stole the painting one night. That was when newspapers could, for the first time, put pictures on their front pages. So there were pictures of the Mona Lisa all over the world when the painting was stolen. Then when it was recovered 2 years later, again, pictures all over the world on the front of newspapers. Ever since then, it's been the most famous painting in the world. Why? Not because it's the best painting in the world, which art historians have been trying to invent reasons why it's the best painting. No, it's not the best painting. It was famous because it got stolen. And that's just a matter of chance that it happened to that painting and not some other painting.
It's great, Robert. Now we are discussing this because my life also depended on some luck. I explained this to my friends, but they argue with me. But we were twins and we were born, and then my mother passed away when we got born, and then our father struggled to raise us because 50 years ago there was not milk or whatever. So, and after a few months, my grandparents from my mother's side came to another city that I was there, and then they said, okay, they're struggling. They have challenges to feed us, and then they said, okay, give one of them we can take to another like capital, Tehran, to raise. And they said, which one do you want to take? I said, one, sister and brother, we're sister and brother. So they said, no, this guy, me, is crying a lot. Take him. So because, I don't know, I was hungry, so I had some pain. They take me. And after 6 months, I got raised in Tehran. I was born, I was with my aunts or like an uncle. And then my sister passed away because they couldn't take care of her. And then I got raised in Capital, and then I was exposed to my uncle, which is a lawyer now in New York. He could support me. I went to a better school in Tehran than in a small city that was like a few hundred miles away, Tehran. And these luck breaks accumulated along with me. I was not aware after I read your book, and also I read Sam Harris' book, like Free Will. I explained this in the last part of that episode that, okay, so, and then I was exposed to your book, and then, oh, I thought about my life, and then, but people forget, maybe the evolutionary is a biological evolution that brains forget about that and only remembers the part. I studied hard, maybe I studied hard to move to US, like got a PhD, postdoc, get hired, but I need to don't forget this kind of chance or like a luck that happened to me, and I completely changed my vision to the life and other people. I just giving a little experience that I have.
And the interesting thing, and this runs counter to what economists teach also, everything comes at a cost, we say. If you want more of X, you need to have less of Y.
Exactly.
But when you realize you've been lucky, that creates in you a feeling of gratitude, and experiencing gratitude does not come at a cost. There have been lots and lots of experiments done. People who are induced to feel grateful are happier, they sleep better, other people like them better, they live longer, they have fewer psychosomatic disorders. Being grateful is a wonder drug. It's something that people would be willing to pay for if they knew about it and it were offered on sale in the marketplace. So yeah, I think recognizing the various ways in which you've been fortunate is just it's a winning strategy. There's absolutely no reason that you wouldn't want to learn to frame events in your life in this way.
I think it's a win-win situation, but I have a question now here. So even though we try to explain to the public, even the intellectual people, when we talk to them, or the rich people, you covered part of it, why still the rich and most successful people in US and all over the world, they are hesitate or they underestimate the importance of luck in their success, even the wealthy people. On the other hand, why it's so difficult for us that we are talking about this subject to explain to them and convince them? Of course, we are talking for awareness, but why people are ignorant? Maybe, as you said, maybe it's part of the biological evolution that brain forgets, or how we can do better job as like you or other intellectual scientists to educate more people that how positive consequence it has if we accept the role of luck.
Yeah, I think if you imagine the person you're thinking of who's resisting this message, what is that person thinking? I can imagine some who are thinking, well, I've worked hard.
Exactly.
I'm talented. I've succeeded, and if I admit I was lucky, then they're going to want to tax me. They'll feel more free to tax me if I admit that I was also lucky. And if they tax me, I'll be less happy. I already tried to explain why that's a false belief. If they tax me and they tax other people who, like me, were lucky, and we all have less money to spend on houses and cars and wedding receptions and the like, we'll be just as happy as before, and we'll be even happier because then we'll drive on better roads and we'll have better medical resources to rely on when illness strikes. So partly it's just a false belief that they will be made less happy if they acknowledge the role of luck in their lives. If you try to tell them that they were lucky and explain to them why they were lucky, that generally does not work. They get angry. Barack Obama, in his campaign for the presidency, tried to explain that businesses who had succeeded worked hard and did lots of stuff right, but they also took advantage of roads that the community built. They hired workers that the community paid to educate. They were protected by police and firefighters that the community helped to pay for. They should give back so that the next generation can succeed. Businessmen got very angry when he said that. They were extremely offended. They thought he was saying, you don't deserve your success. You weren't hardworking and talented. You did it just by luck. No, he wasn't saying that. But there's another way to approach this same task, which is to ask your successful friends, can you think of any examples of when you were lucky along your path to the top? And for some reason, they don't feel threatened by that question. They get interested, and you can see them think about, and then they come up with an example, they tell you about it. And then they, in the act of telling you about it, that kindles the memory of another time they were lucky, and they tell you that too. And before long, they're saying, why aren't we investing more in the schools? Why aren't we providing better community resources so others can do well? But if you try to tell them they're lucky, that's not a good strategy.
So Robert, you covered part of it again, but I think the concept that I understand when I talk to these people, so ordinary people, like public, when they listen to these arguments, they are concerned that it causes maybe some discouragement, disappointment, or diminishes motivation. How we can, not only the CEOs or the successful people, maybe some teenagers, they will watch this interview that we are doing. So maybe if we see, okay, the luck is like working behind the scene that I don't have any control, we have to clarify. You mentioned that hard work is important, talent is important, like persistence is important, but I think we need to transfer this message in a better way. I'm talking about myself when I talk about these topics, to not underestimating the role of other factors in success, but also considering the luck. So how we can explain this to public and also kids, not only the successful people?
Yeah, now I don't know any parents who say to their kids, luck is the most important determinant of success. Let's hope you're lucky. Nobody says that to their children. That would be a completely stupid thing to say to your children. What do we say to them instead? We tell them a lie. We say it's entirely up to you. You make your own opportunities. You gather the knowledge that is hard to acquire. You work hard. You stay late. You find your opportunities, and then you succeed. Those are necessary for success. They're not sufficient. You also have to be lucky. But we don't mention luck because the mere mention that luck is important might lead some kids to just sit back and hope for a lucky break. Why should I work hard? I'll win the lottery, and then I won't have to do any of that hard stuff. So no, we don't talk about luck that way. If you want to be strict about it, it's all luck. What is it that determines whether you succeed? Well, it's pure chance events. They matter a little bit, but mainly it's your talent and the amount of effort you expend. Where does your talent come from? We don't know exactly, but we do know it's some combination of your genes that you inherited from your parents and the environment in which you were raised. And which of those things do you claim any moral credit for? They're pure luck from your point of view. If you got good genes and a good upbringing, you're lucky, pure and simple. So it's all luck. But we don't tell them it's all luck. But still, if you succeed, you feel good. You congratulate yourself. I worked hard and I did well. That's good. You should congratulate yourself. Consider two people, one who works hard and succeeds and says, oh, I was lucky I got the gene for working hard. another, he works hard and he says, "Oh, way to go, Bob, you did it." Who's gonna work hard more the next time when there's a challenging situation? I think the second guy, the one who feels good and congratulates himself for having worked so hard.
Exactly. That's interesting because I recently interviewed Professor Robert Sapolsky. Maybe you know him, about the book Determine and also Behave. We're talking about this kind of luck and also the cause and effect, how we decide or behave. But it's interesting. He also mentioned part of the thing that you mentioned, that out of control phenomena happens. So before I go to next question, you mentioned part of this maybe about the happiness. In general, some people argue that in US or in some capitalistic rich countries in West, people generally are not happy. You mentioned that compared to a few decades ago. Now research shows that Americans are more depressed compared to their grandparents or even the previous generations, even 50 years ago. With whatever criteria we look at the world right now, world is a better place compared to our ancestors. Human is now living in a better, safer houses compared to our ancestors. Our health are high standard. Life expectancy is doubled compared to even 100 years ago or even earlier. We can consume more. We can buy, enjoy the life. We have, as I said, bigger cars, bigger houses. It seems we can enjoy the life. We have lots of tools in our hand. We are not running for prey, or we are not stressed that the prey is attacking us when we are sleeping compared to 100,000 years ago, our ancestors. But still, we are not happy. So psychologists research show that generally speaking, in rich countries, maybe some Scandinavian may be different, but I think in UK, US, this kind of people are not happier. Is it because how we define the capitalism and also part of a liberalism, you covered part of that, that we need to change the taxing system and how the capitalism work? Or is it in our DNA or evolutionary, and because how we are learning from the universe about evolution, about the meaning of the world, that, okay, there is no meaning in the world, that, okay, there's no happiness comes out of it. So what do you think, maybe as an economist, what do you think, maybe generally speaking, we are not happier compared to our ancestors? Part of that might be economy that you covered, but I think there might be some other factors you may want to cover. And how we can make the society, you talk about inequality as well, yes? So the top 20% versus the bottom 20%. And there are, of course, you better know than me, that the more gap between these 20% is the unhappier the society. How we can feel this? Maybe part of that might be the progressive tax, but what do you think about this?
Yeah, the US is probably one of the least happy among the very rich countries. In the most recent survey, the US ranked number 22, number 16 on the list of the countries ranked by happiness. That's obviously way better than many countries.
It's low.
Many countries have objectively quite challenging conditions that they face. We don't face objectively anywhere near the hardship as those, but there is another small group of countries, and they're consistently in the top 3, 4, 5 of the happiest countries on the planet. Those would be the Scandinavian countries, New Zealand, the Netherlands. There's a systematic difference between policies in those countries and policies in the US. Those countries all tax the wealthiest citizens much more heavily than we tax the wealthiest citizens. Here, the top tax is 37%. In Sweden, the top tax rate on the highest incomes is 55 or 52%, I forget which. The people at the top of the income distribution in Sweden are actually happier than the people at the top of the income distribution here. So if tax rates being high on the top incomes makes the rich unhappy, we don't see any evidence at all of that in the comparison between the US and the Scandinavian countries. The Scandinavian countries spend much more on paid family leave. They spend much more, the annual vacation time is much greater there. The public transportation is much more well-developed there than it is here, so there's much less congestion and pollution. The things that the positional arms race model predicts would be different between the US and those countries are exactly what we observe when we look at the data. And the claim that, well, if we had high tax rates like that, then the people at the top wouldn't create as much wealth and we'd all be poorer. Well, actually, the number of billionaires per capita is twice as great in Sweden as in the US. So if the claim is that people won't try hard to become rich in Sweden, then there's no support for that claim either. The tax rate doesn't have. In California, they raised the state income tax rate on the highest earners by 50% some years back. The predictions were all the rich people would move out of California. The rich people moved from California at a much lower rate than any other position on the income scale. The top 1% moved less than any other of the other 99 slots on the percentile scale. So the question of whether we'll ever be really happy, well, the Darwinian model doesn't say that the brain evolved to make us happy. It says that the brain evolved to experience reward from taking actions that make us more likely to survive and reproduce. And to the extent that our survival always depended heavily on where we rank in the group, it's a reasonable conjecture, and we actually have direct evidence in support of it, that ranking higher in the group is associating with higher feelings of satisfaction. But this is not news to anyone. There can only be 10% of the people in the top 10%. So in a certain sense, that's a mathematical recipe for unhappiness. If you're not happy, unless you're in the top 10%, then, well, we're not going to get any happier because there will always be 90% of the people who are not in the top 10%. We do know, however, that even when that percentage doesn't change, if there is less inequality between the top 10% and the rest, everybody is happier. When there is greater sense of community among cities and municipalities, everybody is happier. So there are steps we know to take that will increase those measures, and taking those steps would be a good idea to do, especially since we don't have to give anything up in order to take them. It's free.
Yeah, great. So I think some of the concepts that I see in people argue against this kind of taxing or moving toward more equal society maybe is an experience that they have from communism or from the 60s, 70s, 90s that the communism fall down, and they are against, no, we shouldn't move toward that like equal. But you're aware more than me that even people, they are not talking to go to that system. They are saying even the inequality is good for the society, but the gap, I think the most important is the gap between the top and the bottom. Even the society, if I run a Toyota and the other person drives a Porsche, I'm okay. So I think we can live very friendly. But if I don't have food to eat, and also the other person has like a Ferrari in my neighborhood somewhere, so maybe that causes unhappiness for both sides. I think that's the major thing that people like you are pushing toward, or Robert Sapolsky also, they are pushing toward more equal system in the world and the US, not to be in the communism or kind of that way. So they want to feed these gaps. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yes. No. The question is, how do you get the resources you need to invest in the community without creating bad incentives for behavior? And the simple answer is that we should tax behaviors that cause harm to others. We can raise more than enough revenue to do every public investment ever proposed if we tax only those behaviors that cause harm to others. What kind of behaviors are those? Well, emitting greenhouse gases is an example. We should tax CO2 emissions. If we had done that 100 years ago, there would not be a climate crisis today. We should still do it. People say, oh, I don't want to pay tax. Well, okay, why don't we then say, make the carbon tax revenue neutral? Collect all the revenue from the emissions that we tax. What we know from Oxfam studies is that 50% of all carbon emissions are due to the top 10% of earners in the world. So the top 10% would pay most of the carbon taxes. We then take that money and give it back to the bottom 90%. Everybody in that 90% would get a bigger check each month than the amount the family had paid in carbon taxes. So they have incentives to switch to low carbon options because carbon rich options are more expensive now, but they have enough money to cover all their needs, and they're better off even under the carbon tax. The only people who pay any net payment under the carbon tax are the people at the top, and they get the biggest benefits from the carbon tax because it's their property that's being disproportionately destroyed by all the extreme weather that we're going to face. So there's really no good reason not to do this.
Exactly. Before I move to your third book, so I would like you to cover a little bit about the winner takes all dynamic, because you mentioned about that. My question is, if the US or some Western country are moving away from winner takes all, because some people like 20 years ago when the technology evolved, they said, no, now everybody has a cell phone, they can record and they can broadcast themselves. But you gave a beautiful examples about the recording or about the other examples that how the winners take everything and then leave nothing to other people. How you think maybe we can move away? But do you see a trend that we are moving away in US, or
yes,
how we are?
For a while, it looked like even those markets were going to become ever more concentrated and more decidedly winner take all. But with these new technologies, I mean, you can make a film now with equipment that a teacher can afford. You don't need millions of dollars of equipment. Now there are distribution channels that people can access without having a lot of money. So YouTube now accounts for a very large percentage of the time people spend watching video recorded content. It used to be that most of the time they spent viewing such content was in theaters or watching network television were very heavily winner-take-all markets. Now there are many more outlets that are less decidedly winner-take-all. But even those markets are winner-take-all. If you look at the TikTok influencers, it's a tiny fraction of people who have millions of followers who get the big paydays from advertisers for endorsing products. And they're involved in positional arms races. They're doing crazier and crazier stunts to try to get people to watch their videos so that they can become influencers. And we read stories about girls 12 years old, what's their ambition in life to become an Instagram influencer. There's winner take all there too.
Yeah, thank you. I think we covered a lot. I think the audience are already loving the discussions that I have, you mentioned. So before I move to the third section, I think you can continue. Yes, we are under the influence. You discuss in your book that, for example, smoking cigarettes or obesity or alcohol consumption. As an example of the peer influence, how we are under the influence of the others when we behave in a certain way, that sometimes we are not aware of that. It's unconscious for us. To what extent are we under the influence of the peers' environment that we are not conscious? You gave some example. Can you provide some more examples to the audience? And how you think maybe it may affect our behavior in a good or bad way?
Yeah, I think when we hear the term peer pressure, we invariably code that as a negative. You always hear parents quite reasonably cautioning their children not to copy the stupid behavior of their friends. Don't fall victim to peer pressure. And it's true that many of the influences that others have on us are negative. You mentioned the smoking example. That's as good as any. We know that if you're worried that your daughter will grow up to be a smoker, most parents worry about that. They want their kids to be healthy. I don't think I know any parent who said, I hope my kids smoke when they grow up. The main thing that you're worried about is how many of her friends smoke. That's the strongest predictor of whether she will smoke. If that number goes up only slightly, there's a very significant impact on the likelihood that she will become a smoker in the next year. The fact is, though, that we're influenced by what others do for compellingly sound evolutionary reasons. The world is an incredibly complicated place. There are many hazards. We each know very little of what it would be useful to know to successfully navigate through the world. Collectively, though, we know quite a bit about everything. And so if you didn't have an impulse to watch what others do and take cues from what you see about what you should be doing, you would probably be a total failure in life. You don't know which restaurant to choose. Well, here's one with a lot of people enjoying their meals. The other one's almost empty. Of course, I'm going to pick the more crowded one. These people probably know something that I don't. And that's almost always good advice, but occasionally it will be bad advice. Maybe both restaurants were empty initially and somebody chose the worst one by chance and then everybody else copied. But the fact that we are so heavily influenced by what others do actually opens up a whole new set of opportunities in the policy domain. It's like the invention of the iPhone. There were a lot of products that could never exist before the iPhone came along. The investors use the term greenfield to describe this. There's a whole new set of things. So once we know that people are influenced by what others do, then we can say, do people take that properly into account? I may know that the crowd influences me, but do I take into account that I influence the crowd? The overall smoking rate is the most important predictor of who will smoke, but whether I smoke or not has almost no measurable impact on the overall smoking rate. So if I'm trying to decide whether to smoke, do I take into account, well, if I smoke, I'll make others more likely to smoke? Almost nobody thinks of the problem that way. But would it be good if people did think about it that way? Yes, because if I smoke, that means every member of my peer group has one more smoker in it, is a member of a peer group with one more smoker, and that means each of them is more likely to start smoking. And so I cause enormous harm if I smoke. Why not tax cigarettes and give me an incentive to act as if I cared about that causal chain? We ought to tax cigarettes for that reason. We'd never tax them heavily until there were studies showing that smoking exposed others to side stream smoke, it was called, and that caused greater incidence of various illnesses. Oh, now smoking causes harm to others, we can tax it. That harm is very small. It's, unless you work in a crowded bar with no ventilation, there's a negligible effect from that exposure to side stream smoke, other smoke. The harm you cause if you smoke is you make others more likely to smoke. That's the real reason to tax smoking. People say, well, that's not the government's job to protect people from following stupid peer examples. And I'm sympathetic to that objection. But what about the harm that I cause parents who don't want their kids to smoke? There's nothing they can do if I smoke. That means their kids are more likely to smoke, and there's nothing they can do about it. So maybe you don't want to say it's the parents' fault that they didn't do anything about it, because there's nothing they could do about it. They did everything they could to discourage their kids from smoking already. So tax me for smoking. The good news is that means that taxes that we didn't think would be effective are enormously effective. When we first saw big taxes on cigarettes, the prediction was they'll have no effect. Why? Because nicotine is the most addictive substance known to man. Or anyway, one of the most addictive. People will just go right on smoking. And in fact, that's what happened. We taxed cigarettes, and most smokers just went right on smoking. But some did not. A few didn't start because it was now more expensive. And a few, most people who smoke wish they didn't, a few who were near the border of deciding to quit, well, that was just the push they needed, so they quit. That meant every peer group had fewer smokers in it, not many fewer, but a few. And that meant others were less likely to start smoking or more likely to quit. And over time, we saw the smoking rate fall from 40+%. That's what it was when I was a teenager. Now it's 11%. That's an enormously important achievement. A small tax on cigarettes brought about an outcome that everybody thinks is good. Almost everybody thinks it's good. So tax carbon, tax congestion, tax high-end consumption with a progressive consumption tax. That's just all variations of the same idea. And what we know is that those measures are much more effective than we ever imagined they would be because of behavioral contagion.
Interesting, yes. So I think most of the behavior that we do unconsciously under the influence on environment or peers that we are not aware of. That brings to the next topic. Because of the time, I would like to maybe finish in 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But during the last 7-8 months, I have challenged myself also with the belief of free will. First, by reading and summarizing Sam Harris' Free Will book, and then recently Professor Sapolsky's Behave and then Determine. And I have, as I said, I interviewed him last week. Both of them, along with other philosophers like Greg Corso, they are hard determinist view that they have. So they argue that all things that happen, you covered part of that. If we look at that way, the luck is everywhere. Even our talent, intelligence is not controlled by us. It came from our parents to our DNA. So they are saying they are not morally responsible for our actions because we don't have control or most of them. At least we are less responsible than before. And it, in the sense that deserving, like you mentioned, blame, praise, punishment, or award, or retribution, this type of things they are discussing. When you talk about the luck and about that, so how you consider yourself now, maybe after the writing of this book, or even before, are you consider yourself as a hard deterministic, or the kind of compatibilist in this view? Because I think it's important because the field is coming out of the academia to the public era about luck, about the genes, about kind of other factors, and also moral responsibility come if you consider luck and also free will. Where do you see yourself in this kind of a spectrum of intellectuals that talk about free will?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say that I'm very much on the hard determinist end of that spectrum. As I explained to you earlier, if we look at it in a certain way, it really is all luck what happens. But I've never understood why that view would be controversial, because I don't think it has the implications that some of the opponents of that view seem to think it has. They seem to think that if somebody commits a crime, well, we can't hold them responsible for it because it was all due to external causes. Who would want to live in a world where you could commit crimes without punishment? Nobody would voluntarily join a society organized along those terms. What we know is that if there are rules against killing, if there are rules against theft, if there are rules against slander and mayhem, that the conditions of life will be better for people in those societies than in societies that don't attempt to sanction those kinds of behavior. That seems totally uncontroversial to me. If somebody committed a crime because he had bad upbringing, yes, we should feel mercy. We should maybe be a little less punitive when we decide what's a proper punishment for a crime that the person committed, but that we need to have sanctions against those kinds of behaviors seems completely uncontroversial to me.
Thank you, Robert. So I have two more questions. One of them is about the change. Maybe you covered in some of your books. I'm always thinking to myself, I'm reading to see, we see the world, yes, how superstition or some religion believes that they don't have any rational basis, they are spreading. And even though we present to them evidence-based, science-based like a clues, even they resist. As an economist or person who work as a behavioral economist, so why people are resistant to change, to the irrational beliefs that they have, and how we as a people who are working like in the academia or working to increase awareness of the society, to help them move away from the illogical or irrational thinking toward change to think more rational. What is your experience saying that why not changing, or how we can encourage them to change?
Yeah, that's a great question. And since I have proposals for change that nobody has adopted, it's a question I'm very interested in.
You mentioned that we need to confuse people if we want to maybe change them.
One of the most reliable findings in the field of behavioral economics is called loss aversion. I don't know if you're familiar with the term. It means that people think about losses in life as having much more weight than gains in life. So if you ask somebody, let's flip a coin. If it's heads, you win $10. If it's tails, you lose how much before you would accept that bet? Typically, people would say it has to be heads, I win $10, tails, I lose $5. They seem to weight losses twice as heavily as gains, sometimes even much more than that. And what the effect of that is to make people very biased in favor of the status quo. Why that's such a strong human tendency is a really interesting question. The Darwinian view is that our evolved nervous system was favored because it provokes behaviors that help us survive and reproduce. How does treating losses twice as heavily as gains help us survive? Well, thinking of, and this is pure speculation now, I've never seen this from a real biologist, but But if you're an animal and you're alive today, what you know at the very least is that the resources you currently possess are sufficient. You are alive after all. They must be sufficient. What if you had less? Well, they might be sufficient still, or they might not. So if you have a choice, shall I fight to acquire new territory, or shall I defend the territory I have? That's exactly the asymmetry that we would predict on the basis of that information asymmetry. If I defend the territory I have, I know that territory is sufficient. It sustains me. Should I take risks to acquire new territory? Well, it'd be nice to have new territory, but I know the territory I already have is enough. So the idea that animals are territorial, that they fight hard to defend existing territory, but don't take nearly the same effort to acquire new territory is perhaps a result of that simple asymmetry. How do you persuade people to change? The economist Stephen Levitt did an experiment. He had thousands of people who were confronting a close life decision. Should I leave my partner? Should I quit my job? Some of the decisions were minor. Should I go on a diet? Should I get a tattoo? And they were having trouble deciding. So to be in the experiment, they had to agree that the experimenter would flip a coin, and if the coin came up heads, they would make the change that they'd been thinking about. If it came up tails, they would not make the change. And it was non-binding advice. They didn't have to follow the advice of the coin flip. But people who got heads were much more likely to make the change, people who got tails. And if you estimate the likelihood of making the change conditional on getting heads, you can back out the effect of the change on happiness, because 6 months later, he surveyed them. How happy are you these days? The standard question, 0 to 10. The people who had made the change, because they'd been induced to make the change by the coin flip, were half a point happier on the 10-point scale. That's like the difference between the Netherlands and the US. So yes, people are status quo biased. We should be willing to take more chances. It would be nice to come up with policies that would encourage people to take more chances. Another piece of evidence that's relevant to this point is there have been surveys that ask people, would you rather survive as a paraplegic from an auto accident or be killed in that accident? Most people say, oh, I'd rather be killed than survive in a wheelchair. People who have become paralyzed in an auto accident, 6 months later, they're in a wheelchair, they experience the same mix of moods and emotions each day as people before the accident. It doesn't mean they're just as happy as they were before the accident. They would give up a lot to regain their mobility, but none of them wish they were dead after 6 months in the wheelchair. They think a loss is going to be way worse than the loss actually is. They adapt much more quickly and completely to losses than they think they will. And so, it's a familiar, when my 4 kids were young, it was difficult every day to get them into the bath. It was a struggle. Once they were in the bath, it was just as hard to get them out of the bath. We want to keep doing whatever we've been doing. And that means that there are changes that we really should make that we don't make. And it would be a very useful research topic to study what would be an effective way of getting people to be more open to making changes when it looks like to them it's a close call. Because if it seems like a close call, it's probably a change you ought to make.
Very nice argument. I really enjoyed, and also I learned I think maybe all the audiences learn I need to watch this several times, as each part of this is something I can learn myself. I think we can cover maybe because of the time. I have only one question. We can cover some of the consequences of the ideas, the theories that you covered from the economic perspective. Maybe in the next session we can schedule it for maybe October or November time-ish. And I invite one of my friends. We can bring some more economy, and then practically we can see what we can work with the society, or at least as a activist or intellectuals, we can try to close these gaps between like inequality, or how your ideas are practically not only in the theory but also in the society. We can learn more from that. One last question. So I try to challenge a little bit of my guest, if you don't mind, if you call it challenge. So I think maybe all of my guests are among the big thinkers of the world. You are one of them. I believe asking one philosophical questions, whatever answers you provide is okay, just may help the audiences encourage to think critically, be wiser, and also more rational about the surrounding, about the world, about the universe. We covered a little bit, you covered. Now I know you're standing on the free will, how you look at the hard determinism way to the world. I think this way we can make the world a better place, not only for humans, but also for animals, for everybody. So this is a question that, because we are from Eastern countries, we talk about some philosophy, talk existentialism, like a think of view. So with all of the knowledge you have gained during your fantastic educational lifetime, including your degrees, your hard work, dedications, you are in this age. What is the meaning of life for you? What value does life provide to you, if you can, or you can provide to life? Or do you think these values come from outside? Like if you look at the world, what has a meaning? Or do you think maybe we have to provide or generate these values from inside in order we can make a purpose for our life, or hope for the future, survive, collaborate with others? Because I see some people, they are saying that even the high ranks, they see that, okay, there is no meaning in the world. That's why, okay, we just live and die. But I think I would like to see, because I try to ask this question, it's out of topic, it's out of the scope of what we discussed, but I think because you are among the top thinkers, at least in the US and the world, but whatever answers you give to the audience, help them to maybe even cause some of the changes that you covered.
Well, that's an interesting question indeed. You know, I think I'm quite convinced that our existence is utterly unlikely for a whole variety of reasons. I think just one simple example is it's now, I think, widely accepted that if an asteroid hadn't landed in the Gulf of Mexico, however many 200 million years ago, and the resulting cloud in the atmosphere hadn't caused the dinosaurs to go extinct, the small mammals never would have gained purchase on the Earth's surface. There would not be a single human in existence today, and you know, that asteroid hit the Earth 200 million years ago. That means that being hit by an asteroid isn't very likely in the first place. It hadn't been hit by one that big before or since, and that one could have just as easily missed us. So that view seems to counsel that none of it matters because it's all an accident anyway. But the fact is, we did evolve. We evolved with brains and nervous systems that were forged by natural selection to care about a broad mix of things. And I think here the work I've done on cooperation, which isn't really among the works you mentioned, is the most directly relevant for the question you've put to me. It was always interesting to me that the biologists never really had a good account of cooperation. They always tried to explain it in what economists would characterize as repeated game explanations, repeated prisoner's dilemmas, or interactions where I help you this time, you help me next time. It's mutually beneficial to behave in those ways. That kind of behavior never seemed to me properly described as cooperation in the first place. That was rather prudent behavior. If I help you now and that means you'll help me later and we're both better off, I would be stupid not to help you now. Why am I a good person for doing that? But what we know is that people do the right thing even when they know no one's looking. So I ask people, imagine you've been at a crowded concert, you get up to leave, you had an envelope in your coat pocket with $10,000 in cash in it. You were going to buy a used car the next morning for your son who was going to college. The owner wanted cash. You get home from the concert, the envelope isn't in your pocket. It had your name and address on it. You now realize that sound you heard when you put on your coat as you stood to leave was the sound of the envelope falling from your pocket and landing on the floor. And then here's the question: do you know anyone not related to you by blood or marriage who you feel sure would return your envelope full of cash if she found it? And most people think about that for a few seconds. And yeah, I can name some people. And usually they name somebody they've known for a long time, a friend, a close friend usually. But many people say, I know somebody who would return even a perfect stranger's cash if they found it under those circumstances. And to people who say, no, they don't know anybody, I say, well, you might want to think about getting out more, or making a different set of friends, or rethinking your social decisions in how you've chosen to lead your life. Biologists didn't have a good explanation for why somebody would return cash if they were sure there was no penalty for keeping it. The answer, of course, is that we feel good, or we would feel bad if we kept someone's cash. But then that seems to run smack up against the Darwinian argument that you shouldn't get a good feeling for doing something that results in less resources to help raise offspring for the next generation. And my work on that subject was to try to come up with what was to me a satisfying answer to that question. And it was that if you were motivated in such a way, and others could tell that you were motivated in that way, then let's say there are two kinds of people in the world: cooperators and cheaters. The cooperators, if they could identify one another, could cooperate successfully with one another. The cheaters might want to interact with the cooperators, but the cooperators could avoid them because they could identify them in advance. So then the cooperators would prosper. They would get the resources that would. That's not the world we live in, obviously, but in fact, we're in more of a mixed world where we try to predict who will cooperate and interact with those people. If there were only cooperators in the population, we would quit trying to figure out who's good and who's bad, because everybody's good. You don't buy a burglar alarm for a house in a neighborhood where there's never been a robbery or a burglary. So we have a mixed world where some people cooperate and some people don't, and how the signal that we use to identify the cooperators was the focus of my investigation. And given that we're endowed with that reward structure, then I think being part of a community in which you try to do the right thing and you try to forge institutions that will lead to others to thrive alongside you is absolutely the right way to live. Don't sit and say, oh, it's all an accident, nothing matters. We have the hardware that we inherited, and we ought to live within the constraints of that. And I think leading the kind of virtuous life that Aristotle talked about makes very good sense in today's environment.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed. I think that's what I wanted to hear. So you greatly explained. So yeah, I have the same look into the word, like ontological looking. So I think the word doesn't have a meaning. We all came from randomness. We came from the evolution. Even though you covered, yes, if I think I was reading that the number of the people in some point reached around 1,000 people in Africa. So we were close to extinction. So I could say, okay, if we were extinct, I was not here to talk to this like Professor Frank now. So, but anyway, we are here, and we have to appreciate that we are here, and we have to generate meaning for ourselves. Some part of it came from evolution, maybe some part of it is internal, and we should care about all of them. Thank you, Robert. It was a great pleasure. Sorry, it took a little bit longer than 1.5 hours, but I think we covered a lot of topics. I'm sure that the audience will enjoy. I will put like a caption on this video and then make it ready. It takes maybe a week for me, but I think I will post to the YouTube. I will not do any modifications, so it will be the same. But we can catch up later for arrange or schedule another one. We can talk more. I really enjoyed. Do you have anything at the end to
No,
add?
I'm all talked out, Mehdi. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much. Have a nice
don't
afternoon.
hesitate to arrange another session. I enjoyed talking with you and be happy to do it.
I enjoyed as well. You don't know how happy and privileged I have been. Even I was excited when you answered yes to me. So I think we will be in touch for another session, maybe in a month or so. Thank you. Have a good day, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.